All right, welcome everyone. Tonight we are doing part 2, Act 4 of Goethe's Faust. The format is going to be the same. I'm going to try to go over the highlights, summarize what's happening, and then, as always, I'll just open up the floor to everybody to discuss and share your thoughts, what you thought, and maybe we'll see how it goes. So last time, we covered a very interesting topic of Euphorion and Faust's and Helen's quick romance, which of course flourished and then stopped pretty abruptly with Euphorion's death. And that left us again at this precarious point in the play where you might be wondering, okay, well, what's going on? What's happening next? And again, just like with all the previous pivotal points, it's completely unpredictable. Is Goethe going to come up with something completely new, or is he going to bring us back to some point in the past, like we went back to the study with Wagner and rediscovered something else there and introduced homunculus. So it's never clear. It's never kind of predetermined what's going to happen. There's no clear flow of this narrative. And what I want to do maybe is read a couple of verses from Act 4, and maybe we can just look at them and maybe quickly discuss what you think the significance is. I know some of you have different editions, but in my edition, there were several interesting notes there. And so I'll read a couple of verses, I'll make some quick observations about them, and then we'll move on to summarize the rest of it. So in Act 4, as it opens up, we find ourselves, again, somehow transported to into this mountainous region. It's not clear where, how we got there. And Faust is observing clouds as they pass by. They're obviously high up in the mountains. And Faust is saying, let me see where to start. Well, I guess I can just start here. The essence forges eastward in its compacted train. The admiring eye pursues it in amazement lost. It parts and floating, undulating changeably. It would adopt a shape. Yes, I'm not deceived. On sun-gilt holster in wondrous splendor laid, of Titan size, indeed, a godlike female form. I see it well, resembling Juno, Leda, Helena. In what majestic loveliness it wavers in my sight. And then he goes on to talk about the different kinds of clouds, and then not too long afterwards, Mephistopheles appears and kind of mocks him in his observations. But what's interesting to me is this connection between the clouds and the female form. And he mentions that the clouds resemble Juno, Leda, and Helena. And it's curious to maybe think about what those three goddesses represent and how they play with or interplay with some of the female characters we've already seen, such as obviously Gretchen and Helen being the most prominent. And then in overall, what is the kind of the, I guess, the significance of the female form, or the female as a kind of an object of Faust's desire, or just a theme that goes through the entire work. So the female form is something very interesting, and I just thought I'd point that out before we get into the details of the rest of the plot. So after this very short interlude, Mephistopheles appears, and he kind of brings Faust back from the clouds to Earth, and he says, "Look, I've shown you everything. Look, we're high up in the mountains. Look around you. Look at the Earth." And this scene, of course, is very reminiscent of the scene in the Gospels where the devil takes Jesus to a high mountain, and it says that he showed him the glory of all the kingdoms of the world and wanted him to worship the devil in return for some sort of remuneration in terms of power on earth. Similar thing is happening here. Mephistopheles is asking Faust, what do you want? I've given you pretty much everything thus far, and nothing satisfied you. And Faust says, no, nothing really has satisfied me, but there's one thing that I can think of that I want to try. I haven't really tried. And it's very curious where he goes. Again, if you hadn't read this, you would never guess where he would go with what's like. What do you think is left from what we've seen? I mean, we've already covered just about everything, right? We've covered partying, enjoyment, magic, involvement with women, both kind of the common women and these classical heroines, right? Like Helen. We've covered power, being second in command to the emperor and running the government, and enjoyment of just about okay, what is going on here? Let's remove you. Okay. And Faust goes to something that's, again, very unpredictable. He says, I want to, there's this hamlet of land that is being opposed by the sea. And I want to conquer it. I want to control this land, which is right now in his mind is being wasted because it's right there in the, being assaulted by the ocean, essentially, it can be used. And he says, I want to control, I want to build something like a dam or something that will prevent it from being unusable. And again, it's all, obviously, it's not so much the concrete details of what he's trying to do, but kind of more symbolically, he's trying to control nature. That's the only thing that's left to him. It seems that he has tried things in the romantic arena and poetic arena, and none of that really has brought him any satisfaction. So where he goes next is this idea of some sort of technological control over nature. And I think this is really brilliant and prescient of idea that Goethe is exploring. He's already seen what's happening. I mean, we are right there on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, and how it's going to really change the face of the earth. Really, it's such a far-reaching change that we're still going through right now. But we've conquering nature through technology and maybe gaining some sort of sense of satisfaction and meaning out of that. This is where Faust goes. But in order to do that, there's a small detour in action again, which is this. Right as they're about to engage in this, it turns out that this piece of land belongs to the emperor, the old emperor that we have already met, the one who was right in the middle of economic recession, and his empire was basically crumbling because of all different social, economic, political problems. And if you remember, Mephistopheles and Faust magically tried to solve his problems by introducing inflation into the equation, which again is so prescient and so interesting that Goethe had that foresight to see how people can throw different things at problems that really need a deeper, more fundamental solution. So obviously this trick did not work long term, and so now the empire is in the period of civil war. We have rebellious forces set against the emperor. He's in the middle of this war. He's losing this war, and Mephistopheles says, "Okay, we have to come help him." And once we do help him, then he will, we can ask for this favor to grant us access to this land, and you can, start your project, basically. So the rest of the of Act 4 is basically describing this conflict, which is won again through some sort of trickery. It's devilry, it's magic, it's combination of natural phenomena that Mephistopheles seems to have command over. There's some interesting natural phenomena that are mentioned, such as St. Elmo's fire, which there was no real scientific explanation for it at that time, but it was a phenomenon where you would see some basically like self-igniting air or pockets of air, which I think is connected to lightning and pockets of electrified ions in the air. But of course, they didn't have access to the scientific apparatus to explain it at the time. The other one is also very interesting. It's called Fata Morgana. It's a type of mirage that you can see where things are reflected in the air, again, just really strangely. And Mephistopheles seems to have command of all of these interesting phenomena. And of course, Goethe is using him to draw attention and to kind of weave it into the plot, which again is very interesting because the man had command of science. And I mean, he was, as we know, he was a polymath. He knew geology, he knew meteorology, as it was known at that time. And of course, he weaves a lot of that into the work, which is kind of amazing. Well, with all of this at his command, obviously we know how the story ends. The emperor wins, he's victorious, and then the next thing is he is appointing his right-hand man to high positions, and of course Faust is not excluded from that. That he does get what he was originally after. There's an interesting scene there with the archbishop, who is essentially bargaining with the emperor. He kind of knows that Faust is the servant of the devil, but his idea is he's using it as leverage, essentially, to bargain for something for himself. So he wants an assurance that this particular grant will be given him for the building of this cathedral and so on. So anyway, it's just such a caricature of the religious society, or the religious part of society at the time, where they're quite happy to use whatever they can use to gain advantage for themselves. It's mostly financial and political in nature, not really spiritual. So that's, in my mind, that's kind of the highlights of what we've read. Now I'm going to open it to you to share some of your thoughts on what you thought was interesting or significant, and maybe would appreciate some comments on this theme of the female in the work. I mean, we're getting close to the end, so I'm starting to maybe emphasize some of the overarching themes as we've seen them before we get to the last part of the play, which will be next time. So anyway, with that, I'm going to open it up to you. If you have something to share, raise your hand, type an exclamation mark in the comments, and we'll go from there. Anybody? Yeah, Dimitri, go ahead.
Well, I think I think his quest for the ideal of beauty is finished. That's what I think is happening at the beginning. Like, he was searching for that ideal of beauty, and I think that marks the end of that quest. Regarding your first point, but regarding the second point, that he definitely wants to grab some land from the sea, so he wants to defy the ocean, in some sense. And in part one, ocean represents life. It says life is a teeming ocean. So in a sense, he wants to be larger than life, in a sense. So that is one interpretation of what is happening, So not only does he want to grab land from the ocean to do some planning, urban planning or whatever, urban building, but he, maybe in another sense, he just wants control. He wants to be somebody who is larger than life.
Right. Well, I think that theme, that theme we've seen right from the start, actually. If you remember how um, was it God or the devil described? I think it was Mephistopheles who describes, and he wants the stars from highest heavens and the lusts from deepest hell. So he definitely is that larger than life type of character. But I do think it's super interesting that the part that he wants to conquer is the part that's assaulted by the ocean. The ocean is very interesting part of nature. First of all, represents the origin. And of course, Goethe was aware of the theory of evolution as it was at that point, and the idea that life originated in the ocean, which is actually quite old. Even the ancient Greeks already theorized about that. But the other thing that's interesting to me about the ocean specifically is its role and the imagery in Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the ocean always represented rebellion. It represented something that is untamed. And whenever God would pronounce judgment on some of these pagan nations, the Gentile nations, he would always compare them to a raging ocean. They rage like an ocean. They rise their proud heads as waves. You know, that's the imagery. So Goethe, I'm sure, was aware of that. And so ocean represents this something that's untamed, something that is definitely has this sort of like rebellious streak in it. And I'm very curious, you know, how consciously he chose that particular area. I mean, he could have done the same thing in different areas. He could have, kind of like Jules Verne, he could have gone down to the earth or build something inside, you know, but he's going to the ocean. That's the kind of the last frontier to him. And by the way, there was an interesting passage there where Mephistopheles asked him, well, you know, we've explored the earth. Would you like to go to another planet maybe? And he says, no, I'm actually okay here. I think there's still places here that we can work with. So I thought that was a super interesting line. But of course, again, it's so prescient in the sense that, you know, we think now with our space program and everything else that, you know, we can solve our problems if only we could, you know, colonize Mars or colonize the moon or something like that, right? We'll just, that will solve everything. And Goethe is already kind of planting that seed in there. Thank you, Dmitry. Allison is next. Go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, what I was thinking is, so when they're talking about the emperor, does he mean the emperor like of Rome? Is that what he was?
No, that the emperor that's that's the emperor that we already seen in the stories. It's not necessarily the Roman emperor. It's more like an emperor, probably akin to his own experience. In other words, that German count, not was he count or was he, I forget what his actual title was, like a something like that, a German prince that he would be a right-hand man of. So it's more like that type of emperor, not like the Holy Roman Emperor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because what I was thinking was that it kind of came to me that I felt like what Faust is doing is actually sort of traveling through time to these different main events. And that I feel like, you know, all along I keep trying to figure out, why is Faust doing this? Why is Faust doing that? And then what occurred to me is that it's not really about Faust. It's more that in each of these major events where people, like, disastrous things happen, it's almost like the devil was playing a role in them. Because in each, you know, one of these things, people had a choice as to, you know, are they going to do this? Or are they going to do that? And when they chose the selfish thing, they chose the greedy thing, then all these disasters happen. And it happened all the way, you know, it always happens like that. And so I was feeling like Faust is really just a symbol of us, really, and the choices that were made. And for all of us, we have times when it feels like, you know, Mephistopheles is saying, hey, let's play it, you know, I've got a deal for you. And we can either take it or we cannot. But I feel like kind of the whole theme throughout this whole book really is that what happens when you do choose to go down that road. Because it never really ends well.
Right. Do you have specific moments in the book or specific points in the book where you think harkens to a specific historical event?
I mean, Helen of Troy. For all
Helen
I-
of Troy, right, right, that's definitely there.
Yeah, because I kept thinking, why is he leaving? You know, why does he leave Germany and why does he go there? Like, why? But that's, you know, that whole story with her is such a important part of history. You know,
Mhm,
on so many levels, it was like this, it's so symbolic and so meaningful. But
mhm.
yet there's a million and one things like that since then. And I think that's why that story resonates with us so much to this day. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I think maybe in types, it does make sense to me. Like you know, it's a type of event that has happened over and over again. Maybe not that specific event, because you know, by the time we meet Helen, it kind of already happened.
right,
So we're not really replaying it. But at the same time, everything that is happening to her has been happening and will be happening and has been happening throughout history. So it is kind of a archetype of a common pattern where you have these wars that are based on jealousy
right.
and playing, you know, using pretexts and so on. So yeah, maybe that is.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought about was that, you know, his constant search for the ideal feminine.
Mhm.
What's kind of interesting about that is like he keeps looking for this perfect person. And then I was contrasting that with Shakespeare. And when I can't remember which one it's in, but one of those things where he says something about like her hair was like wire, and he's saying all the awful things about the woman he loves, but he loves her anyway. And I thought, well, that's really Faust's problem. And it's a problem today throughout the world, you know, or it's certainly America, where people are swiping away, looking for the perfect person that doesn't exist. And real love, you know, when you look at these people who have love that lasts for decades upon decades upon decades, it's not that anybody's perfect. It's that they love them despite their imperfection. And they may even love their imperfections. They start to think that they're cute, you know?
Mhm.
And that's kind of Faust's thing, is he's not looking for somebody that's a real person. It's just this like idealized, you know, it's in his head. It's almost like a 16-year-old boy's idea of love, that it's not really like the love that somebody might have down the road. You know, when you're a grown man who's lived with a woman for many years, you know what real love is. But a 16-year-old boy is just like, oh, she's so cute, you know, she's
Well,
hot,
he's
or
not a
whatever.
16-year-old boy.
He's not, but he's sort of like stuck in that spot, you know?
Well, yeah, maybe what's the saying? You can't take a boy out of the man or something like that.
Yeah.
It's true to a degree. I mean, we have this today. We do have men who are older who are acting like 16-year-old boys.
Right.
They still
Yeah.
have the same exact sort of appetite and sort of level of sophistication, if you will.
Right.
So all they care about is looks or something very artificial. However, I don't know if Faust is completely like that. Um, Maybe he is with, I mean, again, I think actually in this act, he does make a mention in that same passage, if you have the book in front of you, in Act 4, right there where he talks about the clouds, the next part there, he's talking about an enchanting shape as of long lost, most cherished boon of earliest youth. And in my book, the interpretation there is that he is actually remembering Gretchen and not Helen, which is interesting because Helen is supposed to be the absolute standard of beauty, probably
Yeah.
more beautiful than Gretchen was. And yet somehow Gretchen now seems more desirable to him, perhaps, than Helen. And again, I'll throw this out to anybody whoever wants to comment. I'm curious as to what do you think about that? Do you really think that he's starting to realize what he lost in Gretchen, and maybe he is having some doubts, or what is involved? What is this whole desire and kind of like not passive aggressive, but more what's that other disorder where you go between extremes, like a polar or bipolar type disorder, where you want this or you don't want it, and you just keep going back and forth. And Faust is kind of like mania. Yeah, thank you, Katie. Something like that, where you oscillate between these things. When you have them, you don't want them. When you don't have them, you do want them. I mean, it's definitely some psychology involved here, but it may be even deeper than that. So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think. Anybody else have any thoughts, insights that you want to share? Go ahead, Dimitri.
Yes, well, regarding your point, why is it that it's Gretchen, not Helena?
Mhm.
Now, it seems to me that Helena represents more of an abstract ideal of beauty, and Gretchen represents something much more concrete, much closer to his heart.
Mhm.
So that's why, and it maybe it also it's a kind of anticipation of what's going to happen later in Act 5. That
Right.
who he's gonna meet, but we're not gonna talk about right now. But who he's gonna meet in heaven, you know? Because Helena, in my opinion, is some completely abstract ideal of beauty, in my opinion.
Right. Right. No, I think I agree with you. I think that's spot on. She is definitely more abstract, and it's not clear. She keeps talking about herself. I don't know if you caught this last time. When she mentions herself, a lot of times she talks to her about herself as if she were not a living person. She keeps saying that she's a myth, an image, like a construction of some sort, not
Yes.
really a living person. What I want to maybe suggest is that she is the same order of being as homunculus in some ways.
Mhm.
Homunculus is kind of this perfect intellect in a bottle, in a retort, but he understands, he is intelligent enough to understand that his main shortcoming is that he's not material, and he wants that. And of course, in the process of becoming material, he perishes. And then Helen is the again the kind of the same idea. She's kind of material, but not really. She is more like a myth. And at the first sight of or sign of trouble, she reverts back to what she is. She just floats away into thin air, and all of her beauty is gone. Whereas Gretchen was a real person,
Yes.
and she did not just float away. She had to physically suffer and perish. So maybe Faust is sort of recognizing that there's more to a living person that is superior than to some sort of like standard of beauty by itself, abstract
Mhm.
standard. Madeline, go ahead.
Oh, let's see. Well, in that first section, that first passage,
Mhm.
I was wondering if I got the sense in this act that Goethe was getting more and more esoteric about everything. And I was thinking this morning love, the first rush of the soul, it might be Marguerite,
Mhm.
Margareta, but it could also be some first early love of the divine, of aesthetics and of beauty, because he's not describing it as a female form in any way. Although he does describe the previous shape of the clouds as a female form.
Mhm.
Nonetheless, this too is vapor. So everything he is talking about vapors and illusions throughout this entire act. The next section sounded to me a lot like Dante. He's saying they're on top, so Mephistopheles starts by saying, but tell me what possessed you to light down. So in other words, you've come down in this horrid place of ghastly rock and vast abyss. How well I know it from elsewhere, actually, it's hell's old floor. Then he goes on about hell and the flames and everything. And then suddenly and he alludes to the chart. So I think that was a lot of it was kind of about Dante, from the top to the bottom, the upward and downward motion, these big crags, but that are somehow also underground. And I think we're definitely in the afterlife, or at least the world of the primeval gods here, because we have the expanding with immense Tartarian force. Then we have some nice bits of the sort of modern geology. And then we get into a part we have in mine, it's roughly line 10425. We're still in that same part. Faust says, do I ask mountains what and where they came from? So the part that starts with that, he says, when nature made herself out of herself. So in other words, there's no outside God or creator here. There's no God forming the heavens and the earth. It's just nature making herself out of herself. And then the next part, in Mephistopheles' response, he's saying, who hurled them there, the boulders? Try and explain such power. Philosophers cannot account for it. So I think he is saying, what hurled them there? What's the force behind this all? The huge rocks sit there, and that's that. We rack our brains and all to no result. And then the common people have no doubt it's a miracle for which great Satan is responsible. Then he refers to the crutch of faith. Then a bit later on in around, let's see, it would be 10490 in my version, still in the same part. Faust says, Mephistopheles is saying how great it would be to go through a town. Driving, riding, one would be a magnet drawing every eye by thousands with doffed hats saluted. So how great to be famous, how great to have people salute you in public. And Faust says, no, not by me desiderated, possibly meaning desired. I'd like to see the people prosper, in their own fashion have some pleasure, learn to read, be educated, so know how to foment rebellions. And so here he gets into something that is a fairly modern concept, which is that all people are educable. In other words, everyone can be educated. So it's not like the peasants are and the common people are so inferior that they could never learn to think intelligently or intelligently enough to start a revolution. And it's interesting because in the later parts, he wants to be emperor. He wants, this whole act is about wanting power. But here he's kind of giving things away. I think he's the author mouthpiece, saying that people have to be educated in order to bring about a revolution. So that was the first part of what I had to say.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, so yeah, if you have the second part, I'll definitely look forward to that. Some of my comments on about that. So I did not talk about the origin of the mountains. Again, this topic seems to be coming up for the second time in this act. It's interesting that Goethe keeps coming back to it. And the other thing that's even more interesting is that Mephistopheles represents sort of this, like, the creationist view, right, of the origins, whereas Faust represents kind of the more scientific uniformitarianism, right, the idea, or the gradualism that was later later became, and it currently is, the prevalent view in geology. I think it was it Lyell that officially postulated that. But anyway, so it's kind of the roles are reversed. Well, not really reversed, but it's somewhat humorous that Faust is the he's the guy who's telling you the truth. Mephistopheles, of course, speaking as if he were there personally, but gives us kind of this jocular supernatural account. And of course, his interpretation of the mountains is that, well, when the devil hurled all the devils into the subterranean region, there was also stuff there together that they started making a lot of gas, and the gas pushed out the mountains. And so you have this explosion. So you have the catastrophic view. I guess in some ways, Goethe is making fun of the catastrophism as an alternative theory for how the mountains and the terrain was formed. So anyway, I thought that was quite interesting. But again, it's interesting to note that Faust is both scientific when it suits him, but he's also quite ready to engage in any kind of mysticism or magic where it gives him some advantage. So he is right there advising the emperor to summon this sorcerer that was apparently a known figure in German tradition. The sorcerer, and I have the name here somewhere, sorcerer of Norcia, or Whitebeard. And then, of course, we also have the miraculous summoning of the three mighty men who kind of parallel the mighty men of David. But of course, they are not really godly men. They are, it's very dubious what, their character is quite dubious, but they do seem to help out Faust in the routing of the emperor's enemies. So anyway, it's quite interesting to observe this dynamic. So thank you, Madeline, for pointing that out. Anybody else who wants to comment on some of these overarching themes, specifically control over nature, or the interplay with the feminine form and Faust's relation to this sort of search for the feminine, whether it's romantic, whether it's the female beauty, whether it's the choice between Gretchen and Helen, which seems to be always there. What do you guys think about any of these topics? Madeline, if you're ready for your part two, please go ahead as well.
Sure. Let's see. Well, as far as that ocean goes, Faust is very angry that the waves are coming towards him. It reminds me of my old dog. The first time she saw the ocean, she went rushing at the waves, barking furiously, and they receded. So she rushed after them, but no, now they're coming back. So she's running back up onto the beach, but no, now they're still barking. Now they're retreating again. So she had a happy little drama going. And it looks as if that's what's happening here. Also in this, the ocean is being characterized as sterile, not as the origins of life. And so I think that it may be just part of the general regarding of nature as not something inherently valuable in and of itself and containing life, or it could be a metaphor for God or for the divine. The great oceanic thing actually contains no real life and no real anything. It's just kind of an empty substance, an empty matter with no essence. I did see some foreshadowing when Mephistopheles said, when they're talking about the last time they saw their emperor, you know, the man, when we put on our shows, all that fake money led him to suppose the world was his to do with as he would. he drew the false conclusion that he could amuse himself and at the same time reign, agreeably uniting would and should, which sounds as if it would also be quite a neat little phrase in German, the way it does in English. And then following that, I have around passage starting around 10610.
Mhm.
Where Faust says it staggered, fell, lurched to its feet. And Mephistopheles talks about, you dared not say how dreadful these things were. Each could and did claim full rights for himself. And this entire little speech by Mephistopheles is a description of Hobbes's war of all against war. And that the reason people, or I will use the M word, the reason men band together and want a strong ruler is because otherwise it would be chaos with everyone fighting each other. Now we know that this condition actually never existed. This is something Hobbes has made up based on his own era and people's behavior, but it never actually existed in human history. But nonetheless, we're saying, okay, we need a strong ruler to bring peace and assure people's safety. Then we do have then Faust's plan is to become the commanding general or marshal and be awarded lands and title from the emperor. And we have this lovely three mighty men. I like their names. I don't know if they were translated for you all in your versions, but they were, in mine, their English language names translate to Bully Boy, Grab Quick, and Hold Fast. So
I
these...
have pugnacious, rapacious, and tenacious in mind.
Oh, those are good.
Yes.
Yeah, no, mine's Bully Boy, Grab Quick, and Hold Tight.
I like the rhyming ones.
Yes.
So these are clearly aspects of Faust himself in his new mode of, okay, I'm just going to try to get everything I can for myself during the course of whatever battle is coming up. And yeah, so I'll stop there and let other people speak.
Okay. Thank you, Madeline, for that overview. I am curious, again, I guess the main thing that is introduced here as kind of the next adventure, if you will, in this section is this idea that we can possibly get meaning and satisfaction out of control of nature. And as a side idea there is that will allow people to have some sort of self-determination and self-governance and so on. But that second idea is kind of just mentioned in passing. It's not really the main thrust of it. The main thrust, though, is control of nature's forces, specifically the ocean, and again, that's obviously the definitely a modern facet of life that's with us today. To a huge degree, our lives are what they are because we've been able to a large degree control nature, and everything about our sort of daily existence is regulated because we can control our the temperature inside of our apartments, and we can control to a large degree the flow of utilities and so on. So that's what we've achieved. Now, in Faust's mind, when he first suggested this as another sort of direction, he thought that would bring meaning. And it's not clear to me what Goethe thought about that. And I'm curious what you think, if Goethe believed that with Faust. Of course, again, we're getting really close to the end. So we have to be getting close to the final sort of straw, right? That, is Faust going to find something where he's going to say, stop moment, you're most fair. If you haven't read Act 5 yet, then it's still out there, so I'm not going to spoil it for you. But we have to be kind of all I'm going to say is we're so close to the end that we have to be kind of circling around, whatever we're going to finally get to. So this has to be close to what will finally trigger that moment, if at all. So I'm curious what you think about kind of our change of direction. We've tried 1,000,001 things in our course of journeying with Faust. Are we getting anywhere? Are we getting, is it warmer or are we getting colder? So I guess I'll leave it at that. Joe, go ahead.
One of the things that I thought of when this specific part had actually come up was that how relevant it is to today's world, especially in the modern world, when we talk about nature, in the sense that there are many people that look at this as nature is not something that should be worked with in harmony with, but rather it should be conquered. And there are a lot of Silicon Valley type of individuals that truly believe this, that we need to innovate our way out of any kind of obstacles like climate, whether it be climate change or anything along those lines. And so it seems like it's kind of a question that Faust, it's interesting that Faust has a similar, kind of almost desire to dominate nature as opposed to work within it. And I think that that's a very modern approach to the world that's being kind of forecasted here. I mean, and it's this insatiable appetite to rule everything. I mean, it's not just rule, kind of a kingdom, not just rule, having, relationships. It's nothing satisfying him, but he wants to rule what God rules in a sense. And so I found this to be the most interesting twist. It's like of them all, in the sense that it wasn't, I mean, is this going to be the thing that satisfies him? And if it is, what's Goethe saying by that? I don't know. But it is a fascinating turn of events in the sense that this is his new project that Mephistopheles thinks actually is going to work as far as getting him to give in and to be satisfied. Yeah, I mean, it and just so happens that the emperor's in trouble, and they're fortunate enough to be able to take advantage of the situation and with their 3 soldiers and make good on potentially Faust's desire to conquer nature. Anyway, that's just it's fascinating to see that somehow Goethe was able to capture some of the modern mentality of today with Faust and the insatiability factor that existed. That I don't know. It's interesting. If anything else.
Let me throw a monkey wrench into this thesis and say, what do you think about the idea that nature is the ultimate feminine? And Faust having tried Gretchen, Helen, he wants to conquer nature as the ultimate feminine form that is not yielding to him and is out there. I mean, nature has always been thought of as female in general, because it's mother nature, right? The word nature in Latin, of course, comes from natus, which means the one that gives birth. So it's mother nature. That word is not incidental. It's fundamentally feminine in its concept. And so, I mean, I'll just throw it out there. I'm not going to comment too much about it.
Well,
But if somebody pick it up,
it's interesting. Can I comment back on that really quick? I think it's interesting because instead of working with nature, it seems to be something that is to be conquered. And that's been an approach and of the almost the industrial age.
mhm,
And it's kind of almost the anti-yin and yang, as opposed to working with the feminine and working with balance,
mhm,
that you're trying to exact your control. And Faust sees himself as a way of bringing order to the world by conquering nature, which is a problem of modernity.
yep. No, I agree. Allison, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, Allison and then Madeline. Sorry. Go ahead, Allison.
So I'm reading On the Road for another book club right now. And it's kind of interesting because I'm seeing parallels. And I read it when I was like 20, and now I'm rereading it. And what is kind of interesting is that in On the Road and this and Hemingway, you see kind of the same thing, where they're just chasing experience after experience after experience without any real meaning attached. And then you can also connect that to the Bhagavad Gita, when they have this whole idea of the center and the periphery, and they're chasing all these peripheral things because they're not more really like at peace within themselves. And it's kind of interesting that it's a similar theme. And then this one was written so long ago, and Hemingway and Kerouac is like mentioning Hemingway a lot in it. So he's clearly influenced by him, but it's kind of interesting how this theme is prevalent in so many books. And it is kind of like, but what's kind of interesting is like when you think about like a long time ago, I mean, it's changed with technology, because we have all this technology and you can get on a plane or a train or drive. You have access to a million more experiences than you would have had in, say, 1402. I mean, it takes a long time to get on a boat and sail somewhere, and they didn't work too well and they'd sink, and so because we have all this access, we can have so many experiences, and it's exciting. I mean, I love to travel. I love to have new experiences, but sometimes, it's like the movie, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. Like, if you're running around from place to place to place, or relationship to relationship, or thing to thing to thing, are you ever really experiencing any of them in depth? Do you ever really know something? I don't know, like my parents lived in Paris for 4 years, and I remember my mother saying, she said, the longer I stay here, the more I realize how little these tourists are seeing of it. And it's only when you stay somewhere for year after year after year that you truly get to really know a place. So, he's having all these experiences, and I feel like this whole war scene is just another experience. It's like it's like his bucket list of things to check off in life. But he doesn't seem to really be gaining anything from any of this stuff. It's just like check, check, check. But
So you don't think we're making progress? We're just walking, like we're just running in circles here, you think?
that's what it feels like. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a completely open question, because if Goethe is trying to make an argument that we're actually getting somewhere, as a reader, you have to ask yourself, is he convincing? Are we actually making progress? And honestly, I don't know that we are. And especially as we get to the end, we haven't gotten there yet, but just like with Dante, you have to ask at the end, is this convincing? Is this a convincing ending? Does this make sense? Or with a lot of these writers, like Dostoevsky, with Crime and Punishment is a good example, where you kind of have this salvation and redemption happening at the end. And, a lot of people are left unconvinced that makes sense. But it may, and that's why, we have to ask ourselves, is this a convincing sort of flow of events? Right now, I would tend to actually agree with you, Allison. I don't know. I'm looking at Faust, I'm looking at his character. I don't know that he is really that much different than who we met in the beginning. He's kind of the same. And
Yeah.
maybe that's the point. Maybe that is the point, that a modern person, they can't, whatever they do, they can't escape their predicament, whatever they do. And so they turn to more and more extreme ways to satisfy themselves, ways that perhaps are damaging on a larger and larger scale. Initially, we're just damaging individual family. Then we're damaging perhaps a whole country. Now we're possibly damaging the entire world, right? With these, control of nature fantasies. So maybe that's the underlying cautionary theme here, is that this Faustian ideal of striving and moving and having this limitless experience is ultimately the path to ultimate destruction, not ultimate meaning. So I'll leave it at that.
It's interesting how it contrasts with the Native American idea. It was that you only take from nature what you need.
Mhm.
And they were really more about working with nature in a way that would, you benefit them so they weren't starving, but you have to respect nature. And we came along with a completely different view, and it's just not gone well for us.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
You really can't, I always just say, you really can't mess with Mother Nature. She always wins in the end,
Yeah, that's why
Got a house right next to the ocean. It's pretty for a while, and then it's gone.
that's why every time we make these tremendous advancements, it makes me a little bit nervous, because it's like a rubber band that you keep stretching, and it's gonna come back at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Madeline, go ahead.
So it is back. We have all the endocrine disruptions from the nanoplastics. Just
Yes.
thought I'd introduce that cheery note. I was thinking about the theme of remote viewing in terms of what both Joe and Allison had mentioned. It has to do with technology. So when Faust, somewhere in the general realm of line 10770, let's say approximately.
Say that line again, sorry.
10770.
Okay.
Very approximately would be Faust is talking up his people, the mountain folk, who he's got going for the army. And he's saying they're skilled in rocks, read deep in nature's book. So that could be looking at fossils, or it could also mean people with special insight into the inner workings of nature and the world. And their remote viewing is by spirit power. Subtly, they construct forms clear and crystalline without defect. Then in the crystal's eternal silence peering, perceive what in the upper world is occurring. So we have some of this sort of as below. People who are down below are seeing what's going on up above. I don't know if they're inside the rock, they're inside their minds, but at the same time, so like us in a way in our own darkness, but also peering through our crystals, either our crystal balls or maybe our lenses of different kinds, telescopes, microscopes, things like that, to see what's going on in the other realms. Then we have, in the next little section, we have Faust talking about the Sabine sorcerer from Norcia. Is your devoted servant, staunch supporter. So this is someone who the emperor had rescued from the flames. He was being burned by the church. And here he is, he's so devoted to the emperor that from a distance, he is studying the emperor's astrological charts and trying to determine what will happen. So he's doing also a form of remote viewing of the emperor's future, both from his own physical distance from the emperor, but also his temporal distance in time from the future. And we see him again a little later on. He gets mentioned again because somewhere around line 10950, we've got all these mirages going on. It's a absolutely wonderful section. We've got the visions, we've got everything. And the emperor says, I'd like to know who we owe nature's kindly doing us such favors. Mephistopheles says, why, who else? The necromancer, as anxious for you as a mother. And he is once again talking about his gratitude on seeing that the ancient fellow found his seat too hot, commanded his release. This spoiled a pleasure dear to priests. Gone was the church's favor. And I think that there, and also in, here we are. I think a lot of this section really is about Dante, because later on he mentions the, I forget how to pronounce them, Ghibelline and
Gibelins, yeah. Yeah, Gibelin.
yeah,
Mhm.
Ghibellines and Guelphs.
Yep.
He
Yeah,
mentions their everlasting enmity on line 11-130. Oh, and then right after that, it was absolutely wonderful. The devil likes his revels animated. He's found that what works best is party hatred, which ends at last in dreadfulness and horror. I thought, you know, that could be written right now. That could be written right now today. Is this hatred of political parties ending in dreadfulness and horror?
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madeline. That was good. I was curious too about the little again elf folks or folk or the gnomes, all the different creatures that live in the mountains, and what the kind of what the underlying story is with Goethe mentioning them and bringing them up. Possibly, I think this is just part and parcel of the kind of the romantic subject or topical treatment of folklore, and this idea that folklore somehow I guess gathers in it some sort of natural truth that is inaccessible rationally. And so we have all of these natural phenomena that are currently inaccessible through scientific means, but they're real, and Mephistopheles uses them. And so is you know, all those crystals and all those minerals that, you know, they could just hypothesize at that time how they were formed, but they couldn't really explain it. Not really. I mean, it was just really recently that we've understood much about how crystals form, and I mean, it really like 200 years before Goethe's time. So obviously the explanation tended to be, well, it's just this natural, it's force of nature, almost like this mystical thing, which could be personified, right? And the way he personifies it is through these creatures that are both mystical, magical, somewhat connected with alchemy, right? What's above or what's below is the same as what's above, and what's above is the same as what's below, the macrocosm. So yeah, it's this really interesting web of ideas that he is weaving together. But I don't. What do you think, though, is the connection with this idea of controlling nature ultimately? Because is this part of this theme? Is it perhaps somehow connecting it with the demonic or the magical theme somehow? I'm not sure if that's.
Well, I think in this one, seems like in this whole act, nature appears to be getting completely out of control.
Mm.
In fact, it is not. Those are all illusions. And everyone is reacting to them as if they're real. So in fact, no one is controlling nature. They're just controlling the effects in other people's minds. They're controlling other people's perceptions. There are no real lights dancing. There are no real floods. None of this is actually happening in the real world outside the self. but it is happening in their perceptual world because it's an illusion. So there's no actual control of nature happening here.
Okay, how is this then what's happening in Auerbach's cellar, you know, in the very beginning, where we have this Dionysian sort of phenomenon and subterranean fire and all kinds of things? I mean,
Oh, yes.
okay, okay.
Wait, could you go back to that and explain that? I remember Auerbach cellar pretty well, but can you make the connection for me?
Well, the connection is we have, you know, Mephistopheles and Faust together, well, or Faust through Mephistopheles bidding, offers the emperor the help of these creatures
Oh, yeah. Okay.
that will supposedly use whatever vapors or whatever, you know, they have up their sleeve. Ultimately, they're going to create these natural phenomena that will confuse the enemy's army.
Right.
They'll have these lights, St. Elmo's lights, Fata Morganas, these mirages that will confuse and essentially cause them to be misdirected and lose the battle. So Madeline is suggesting that, in fact, there is no magical control. It's an illusion. It's a trick, which actually makes a lot of sense when you think about the play being a state. You know, we're on the stage, right? We have a director, we have the poet, we have the jester. So everything, in one sense, is a staged event. So perhaps Madeline has some insight here, where she's saying this is actually just another trick, and nothing is being controlled. What's being controlled or influenced is people's perception of it. And so, to my earlier query with Auerbach cellar, maybe that's exactly what was happening there. Is they were just they had an illusion. They thought that they were, and in fact, when you read it, it does sound like that, right? They were holding each other. They thought they were holding some beautiful nymph or something like that, or
Right.
eating grapes, and you know, maybe it was all just a trick. So yeah.
There's also the part where after the emperor has won, basically the one of the first things he does in his first speech is he credits himself with the victory. He says, perhaps we had some unorthodox help. However, we won in the end thanks to our own endeavor.
Isn't that the government at its best?
Right, right. We thank thee, O Lord, sounds from thousands of throats. But most devotedly, I look in myself, within me, in pious acknowledgement, a thing I have done rarely. So he's saying basically he's piously acknowledging himself, not God, you know, not the forces of nature, just himself for having accomplished this victory. And then that leads into the part where he is giving awards to the 5 princes. He's giving them different offices in the kingdom. And then that ends up in the part that you had brought up before, Phil, about the church and the lands. And suddenly the church is getting
A lot of land.
church is getting a lot of land. The church is also getting tithes, taxes, and rents from people's use of the land. A share of gold from the loot. From far off, we'll have to cart timber, lime, slate. So that's forestry and mining. Then the haulings, the peoples, urged on from the pulpit. So that means the common people are going to do this labor for free. At the very end, and then he says, but now I remember you granted that scoundrel the shores of the emperor, or the shores of the empire. And then the emperor says, exasperated, but the land isn't there yet. It's still underwater.
Right.
And he ends by saying, I might as well sign the entire empire over. So in other words, he's saying, so basically I should be giving everything that I think I just won, I should be handing over to the church, which of course also had no part in the victory. the victory was brought about by the heretic necromancer who the church had been burning and his illusions. I was very unclear at the end if the emperor in fact signs the document or not. I couldn't tell. I don't know what anyone else thought, if that was clear, and I just couldn't understand it.
I think it's implied that he's agreeing to all the terms.
That he does, okay.
Yeah. But it is quite humorous and also entertaining to see how Dante Goethe is criticizing, although we might as well say Dante, because Dante is doing the same thing in the Commedia, where he is, if you remember, he has different popes that are supposedly are supposed to lead people to heaven. They're burning in hell because they themselves are heretics and corrupt and so on. So Goethe is following up on that tradition, and of course criticizing the clergy and criticizing the church for its just complete moral decay and corruption, and of the highest degree. Like you said, Madeline, they had no part in this victory, and yet they're there with the hand stretched out, trying to get, well, not really stretched out. They're kind of trying to force this all of these benefits on their enterprise. So yeah, it's a truly interesting picture of society that we have. So it's not just individual anymore. It's a picture of society, as it's not just Faust that, maybe put it differently. It's not just Faust that's on a quest for unlimited power and adventure. The church and everyone else is on the same quest too. They're just not, we're not just following that thread, but it's there. So everybody is kind of doing the same thing, and that comes through pretty clearly in this last episode.
It's also interesting that first he gives a bunch of prerogatives to the five lords. And then he suddenly turns around and gives those to the church. Right. So he's basically creating a conflict between the two estates. As we have, first he's giving them the lands from the foe, to enlarge those your lordships already own, a fair seigneury, the rights of further extension of the properties granted by purchase, exchange, and succession. He gives them the right of judgment. As judges, your verdict is final, pronounced one for all, no question nor challenged allowed, nor right of appeal. Yours be all levies, rents, tolls, taxes, and fees from salt works, mines, mints, all their royalties. So he's just given these to the five new lords of the realm. And then the archbishop says, oh, but wait, the church needs these things. So now he's like, oh, okay, I'll give them to the church. But he's already given the right of primogeniture. He's actually insisted on it for the new lords of the realm. So that, I assume that means that they and their descendants are going to be fighting with the church over who gets this stuff.
Quite possibly. I mean, this all brings up, like the Vatican and some of the, its role in financial dealings and in, like you said, like ownership of real estate and so on. What role does the church really have in these worldly affairs when you think about it? But of course, it's inevitable when you have your object is not really spiritual, it's not really inward or heavenward, it's more outward and focused on earthly types of enterprises. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
It's interesting that, I mean, in a way, in their own way, Faust, in a more obviously a more mystical way, is trying to dominate nature, but so is the church. I mean, in a way, it's trying to own everything. And it doesn't even want Faust to have anything, like, even though he's responsible for the victory. It's like this, that represents something in and of itself, that the place that is supposed to be this, high and holy, is really just as much interested in dominating nature as Faust is. And so that there's this kind of parallel between these two. They just have the different way of doing it.
Mhm.
And it's almost as if they're both, I don't know, they're both suffering from the same disease in a way.
Yeah, the way I would put it is, imagine a theater and it's the same actor and he's just wearing a different mask. So he puts on a Faust mask.
Exactly.
A second later, you see him in the Archbishop. And we've seen this, by the way, right? We've seen Mephistopheles being in somebody else's garb, and we've seen
Right.
Faust being playing a different character. So this is theater. And ultimately, like you said, Joe, I think you're right. I mean, it's the idea that you have the spirit, Faustian spirit, that has permeated everyone. And it's not just him specifically. I mean, we're just focusing on him, but it's really everybody, and everybody in the church. The emperor himself is, we talked about this, the emperor himself represents Faust very well, Faustian type of temperament, if you will. He has unlimited ambition. He has very little competency when it comes to running anything, which is why he's always in trouble, and his empire is always crumbling and on the verge of downfall every time we see it. And so so absolutely, we have Faustian disease kind of permeating, spreading to every corner of every character in the play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's something about dominating nature. You're dominating the world. You're imposing your will on the world.
Yep.
And it's almost like anti-God.
Well, I would say it is God, right? Because again, going back to the very beginning, how does Mephistopheles describe Faust? Well, he kind of does two things. One, he says he's this little grasshopper who hops from, place to place. But then he says he's also this little god.
Right.
He's a little god himself. He wants to be the god. And
this theme is throughout, right? With even
Mhm.
Hermopolis, this idea you're creating life out of black magic and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Totally, yeah. Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, the whole idea of, you think of it as like there's religion and then there's the devil, and they're supposed to be opposites. But this is showing that the devil is actually within, the church. And, and I feel like that's just such an interesting way for it to take it, and it can be, but it's also saying, like, just like within human beings, you've got the angel and the devil, you have these two different desires fighting, like the good one, the bad one. But even within the church, you have the same thing. You have, there are people in the church who are absolutely wonderful, and then there are people who are, part of, organized religion that are absolutely horrible. And, in any situation, people have a choice to make as how they're going to behave. Are they going to, do the right thing, or are they not going to do the right thing? And that, any sort of church is no different from anything else, really. And I do really love that one line about the, grant us the land. Oh, but it's, it's still under the sea. That's okay. We'll take it anyway.
Just in case.
Just in case it dries up.
Yes.
We want it.
Yeah. That was great. Anyone else wants to add anything to this? I think it's super interesting that after a while, you start reading a lot of these books that tend to focus on the same topic but from different angles. I keep coming back to Dostoevsky, where, especially the demons that we've read a while back, where the guy says, he's trying to build this perfect society and says, I start with the premise of perfect liberty, and I end up with total authoritarianism or something like that, total slavery. And of course, this idea of controlling nature has the noble end in mind, that people will have freedom and ability to kind of control their own fortunes and maybe have some sort of livelihood. But in reality, I think Goethe already understands that what will happen is it will just be domination, more total domination of those same people that are, maybe he doesn't understand me. I guess that's the open question. Does he really have this foresight, or is he just being a little bit naive about this utopia that once we give, once we have this enough technological solutions to these things, that people will somehow automatically become more free. But the part that keeps haunting me is this idea that we're actually ourselves part of nature. We're not separate from it. So anything that allows us to dominate nature allows us to dominate ourselves, which again, I don't know if Goethe really explores this, but it's there to be seen. I mean, obviously Faust himself realizes that he is part of nature as well.
There's actually a scene in On the Road where the main character is talking to this other character about Dostoevsky, but the other guy keeps butchering his name and he keeps calling it Dusty Off. It's just funny watching them all pop into each other's stories.
Well, yeah, you make these connections. I mean, Dostoevsky is only, I guess, 65 years after Faust publication, or 60 years even for some of his earlier works. So it's not that he's not that far removed. The thing that makes a huge difference, though, is this industrial revolution and its impact on society. And it was so rapid. Dostoevsky and people that lived at that time saw all of those advances that Goethe was just on the foreseeing, or maybe it was standing on the cusp of. But it really took off, and it was a very fast change. But everyone noticed that, and that raised all of those questions. It brought all of those questions back to the forefront: the questions of value, questions of utility. What's more important, the boots or Pushkin, or all of those things are always keep coming back to us. So anyway, I'm curious where Goethe really kind of fit in within that spectrum. Did he really think that this conquering nature ultimately would lead us to some sort of utopia? I have a suspicion that he didn't, partly because it's not part of the romantic ideal, I don't think. Romanticists, I think, wanted to worship nature and adore it, and compose poetry inspired by it, but not really put it in a cage. So anyway, any other closing thoughts? We're almost at time. Oh, one of the I don't know if you thought, I thought it was curious. In the third act, if you remember, Homunculus and that whole scene with Galatea and them, riding in the ocean with the Nereids and all the other folks there in the classical Greece setting. I mean, it was Act 2. Yes, sorry. This is Act 4. This is Act 2. Act 2, absolutely. Right. So the mood was completely different. The ocean was this place of tremendous energy, freedom, joy, even eros, right? Love, where Homunculus finally meets Galatea and he falls in love with her and he wants to join her in this experience, and he kind of breaks his glass prison and maybe perishes, maybe he's united with the ocean, whatever. But the point is, then they sing this hymn to the ocean as this primeval force of nature, this force that creates life and energy and is this engendering principle of everything. And now 2 acts later, the ocean is this thing that we need to tame, that we need to, limit. We need to build some kind of contraption around it to, it's not a living thing anymore, even though Faust saw it as what it was just relatively recently. So the contrast couldn't be more stark. I'm curious if anyone has thoughts on this. Are we maybe, Allison is not convinced we're making any progress. Maybe it's actually the opposite. Maybe we're regressing. Maybe we are on a downward path somehow, and we are actually losing the plot here.
That's a really good connection. I never thought about it until you just brought it up.
Dimitri, what do you think? I know you sometimes have these interesting insights that the rest of us miss. You muted.
Can you specify it more concretely so that
Well, in Act 2, if you remember, the ocean is this place of kind of joy and liberation. You have these dolphins and nereids, nymphs swimming in the ocean. You have Galatea, her father they're all kind of swimming around and having a good time. And then you have Homunculus, who joins them and is also kind of enthralled in all of this. And in this scene, and by the way, it all finishes with this hymn to the ocean, right? As the ocean is connected with Eros, it's connected with all the primeval elements, right? The four elements, and it's like the source of life, basically. And in this act, the ocean is completely impersonal. It's just a force that needs to be tamed and contained using some sort of technological human prowess. So the question is Faust actually losing the plot? Is he regressing? Is he losing this connection with nature that he witnessed in Act 2? Presumably he witnessed. I mean, we don't know if he was there. I think he was in that same sort of arena. Maybe it was just Homunculus that experienced that. Anyway.
Well, the ocean. I mean, I think we made a connection before that there was a difference between the ocean and the mountains, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember there, and I mentioned that there are two types of there is pantheism, which where you get this oceanic feeling where you're connected with the ocean, you're part of the ocean, and there is dualism where God is separate from nature, from you. Do you see this? Do you see the distinction?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
in this case, originally this oceanic feeling would represent this pantheistic view, which I think Goethe shared. He shared this pantheistic view, and here he gives his something quite opposite to that, where he controls the ocean, where he's no longer part of the ocean. So he tries to separate the ocean and man. Man is no longer part of the ocean; he controls it. Do you see the distinction? So, but I cannot get a deeper grasp of it right now.
Okay, no, but that's good. That's a good way to summarize. I wasn't thinking of pantheism necessarily, but yeah, that's exactly it.
But that points to another point. What is Goethe? Was Goethe really romantic? Because remember my comment last time, I said that Goethe claimed that everything classic is healthy, everything romantic is sick, and I think he was all right, So how much classical is there in Goethe? Was he really romantic? I don't think he was really romantic. Well, first of all, he's timeless. Goethe is timeless. He cannot really be categorized as strictly romantic or strictly classic. Maybe he was borderline. I don't like.
I think he was like he was universalist.
Yes, in a sense he was.
Just think of we haven't really paid a lot of attention to the literary qualities of Faust because it's in translation partly, but he has been using the types of verses used in like classical texts and in folklore, and he's used prose, and he's basically just being showing off his versatility. He's been mimicking basically every kind of meter and every kind of rhythm that's been known to man up till that time. So he's definitely trying to gather in himself all the different threads of artistic expression when it comes to literature. And so in that sense, I totally agree with you, Dimitri, that he is not just, from one period. Of course, people
Yes, he's not.
in the Romantic period, I don't know that they necessarily said, well, we are the Romantics. I think it was
No,
later.
no, but he knows what he uses the specific word romantic.
Mm,
He says that romantic is something that is sick. Classic is something that is healthy. And I think he's just as healthy as he could be. So there is not a classic in him.
a healthy man. All right.
Yes.
All right. Anyone else wants to add to this?
Yeah, I think I like what Dimitri's saying here. I think that Goethe is, with this whole thing, especially in his part 2, is saying he's been trying to take all different points of view all along, just as Dostoevsky does. And I think here he's saying that neither classicism or romanticism on its own is sufficient. That they're each kind of reactions to each other in a sort of cycle. And that it's going to be the synthesis of the two that's the important thing.
Well, the synthesis kind of dies. That's the problem with the synthesis, right? Euphorion was supposed to be that perfect synthesis of classical and medieval, or classical and romantic, and it meets this untimely end. So what does that mean for us in terms of the synthesis?
Well, but Euphoria was from, wasn't Euphoria the child of a god and a half god? And furthermore, Euphoria is a high. It's a good feeling. It's a good feeling all the time, as we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And the era that he chose for it was medieval.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not writing in that era. He's looking back on it from another era. So I think he's actually being critical of what might have seemed possibly like an earlier attempt at synthesis of.
I'm going to have to contradict you a little bit here, Madeline, because I was looking through the notes here, and I think we actually have Goethe's letters, interpretive letters, meaning he writes letters to Schiller and to all these other writers at the time.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And I think he actually mentions what he meant by Euphorion. And I think if I can find it real quick, it's basically, it's the spirit, the perfect spirit of poetry is how he puts it himself. So that was his intention. Whether or not, again, he succeeded in that, I don't know. But you guys keep talking, and I'm gonna try to find this real quick because I want to have it. I want to do a direct quote here, so that I'm not putting words in his mouth.
Well, no, if you do.
Yeah, Madeline, please go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. You go ahead.
Okay, if I can find it real quick. It's of course, now that I'm looking for it, I cannot find it. Yeah, I have this in this edition that I have. I don't know if I can make it clear or not. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
I don't know. My camera is really finicky.
I have that edition.
Yeah, so this edition here, it has a bunch of letters of Goethe that he composed in conversation about different parts of Faust. And again, if I can only find it. I'm gonna have to search for maybe before, and maybe that'll be better. All right, I can't find it right now. I'll have to look for it later. But bottom line is, I think that was the intention. Now, how well he succeeded in convincing the readers of it. It's not clear, especially since we're kind of debating it, right? It should be more clear what exactly is meant by it. But at the very least, it's definitely a synthesis of two cultural trends, right? The classical and either romantic or medieval or just Western European in general. And the fact that it ends up, it has a short-lived existence, a peak, and then a death with nothing to follow it. What is that saying? I mean, is that actually saying that the Western civilization has reached its peak in terms of art? And now that it has reached it and there's nothing forthcoming, it has turned its attention. It's now majoring not in art, but in technology. And if I may bring Spengler into this conversation, Spengler says that the surest sign that a civilization is in its decline is that it has abandoned art and it has now made technology its prime object.
Right.
He cites different examples of that. So if you believe Spengler, then we are in trouble because we've definitely abandoned art in some ways, in terms of folk being, in terms of that being a prime focus or prime sort of objective, at least in Goethe's mind. If we're to believe his sort of simile here. Go ahead, Alison.
Well, I think what the artists are doing now is they're really incorporating the technology into their art. So rather than view it as like that's a different world, you go to these art exhibits and there's like the painting component, there's the video component, there's they're working with them in all these different ways to
yeah, it's always super interesting to put side by side literature and art. I find it totally fascinating because to me they all express something that's a layer below, right? Something that's happening in people's consciousness, and it finds its expression in literature, it finds expression in visual arts and music, etc. So if you put them side by side, you can kind of see what's happening. And yeah, so it's maybe we should do a meetup on this and just do kind of like a slideshow of different things like that. I don't know if Shrikant would be open to this. I think he likes to focus more on text, but if you do,
I think he'd be open to this.
yeah, okay. Well, maybe that's something we should explore because it's super interesting if you think of it from a standpoint of just consciousness, right? People's consciousness, which becomes social consciousness and culture, and then civilization is really just the working that out, how that changes and how that either progresses or decays.
And a lot of things that have changed, like movies, that was a new technology. Now we don't even think of it. We're just like, okay, that's just something that exists. But I think there's a lot of ways that things are going to change with art and technology, with computers and,
Oh, it's changing already. Oh, no question about it. It's been changing since probably the 60s. I'm actually a little bit involved in some of it, not as an artist, but more as a kind of connoisseur of digital arts. So I can tell you a little bit about it. We have been experimenting with digital art since the dawn of computer age, really. So it's definitely there. The interplay between technology and art is absolutely there. So you're absolutely right. Awesome.
Also, like I remember Philip Glass got a lot of criticism because he was using synthesizers in his music. But I think he's amazing. He's a genius. I love his music. And I went to one dance performance where they had drones fly out over the audience with cameras.
That was part of the
and then the cameras were filming everything and then putting it on the screen behind the dancers. It was just really wacky, but it's interesting.
Interesting. Well, actually, since we're talking about this, I might as well mention it. I was at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York last week, and we have this amazing exhibit of digital art by I forget the guy's name. Last name is Anadol. It's this. If you've never seen it, Rafik Anadol, I think that's his name. It's this amazing installation, and what it is, it's art that's generated by a bunch of different algorithms, but it is absolutely stunning visually. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend. You can probably find videos of it on YouTube if you search for it. It's on exhibit, I think, until March. So you still have time to see it if you ever plan to come to New York, or if you're already here. So anyway, yeah, that's another interesting thing that maybe Spengler did not anticipate, is the what happens if civilization starts to merge art and technology. Is that potentially a way out of the stagnation, out of the decline? That maybe it's not a rigid scheme like he has, right? He has this technology as a separate thing, art as a separate thing, and then it kind of interplays like that. Well, that's fascinating.
What would be your source, just out of curiosity, for a meetup like that? Oswald Spengler, or?
For a meetup on just yeah, I mean, he would definitely be one of the sources, yeah, Spengler and the Decline of the West would be definitely one of the sources. But then the other source would be just the different visual artists from across history, basically, that we could bring in. And it could be visual, it could be music as well, because again, music is just another expression of the same consciousness typically. So yeah,
The idea. That's why I'm just.
Yeah, it would be a long meetup because we have to go pretty quick here, or we could break it up into sort of periods of time. That would be another idea.
My son is actually studying digital art at Pratt.
Oh, okay.
So, I don't know.
Yeah,
I've been trying to get him to come on some of these. I'm like, you'd like this one or that one. He never does it, but yeah, this would be
no,
it.
it's absolutely fascinating. I was telling my mom about it the other weekend, and she said, no, I prefer the one where they draw it, themselves, not the computers draw it. So there's definitely some of that kind of opposition to this new trend. But who knows? Maybe that's the new another new movement that we'll look back on and say, oh yeah, that was another huge sort of discovery in the evolution of art. Okay, well, this has been another fascinating discussion. I want to thank everybody for joining. Next time we're going to finish up Faust.
Madeline has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to weigh in and say I like the Spengler idea. Also, Goethe himself was quite the polymath. He did a lot with optics and other things. So that would, in and of itself, make an interesting meetup. And I know there are some things on YouTube about sort of the scope of his interests that people could watch first, or you could show during the meetup. The other thing is, I'm wondering if we could either allot half of the next session or have a separate one, because I know that every part of part 2 is supposed to correspond to a chunk of part 1. So like act 1 of part 2 corresponds to some first chunk of part 1. Act 2 of part 2 corresponds to another chunk. And it's supposed to be the individual level in part 1 and then the social level in part 2. I was able to make the correlations in act 1 of part 2, but then I just lost track. And I would love it if we could look at that and discuss it, because that apparently was Goethe's grand plan for part 2, was to take the same things in basically the same order from part 1 and present them on a group social level.
Thank you for that suggestion, Madeline. So yes, we are going to, we're going to have this next session where we're going to finish up with part 2, act 5, which is going to take us to the end. And then we're going to have a separate following meetup that we're going to look at the entire work. And I think that one is where you would probably want to bring up this topic. And I can mention it certainly in the next meetup for those who haven't attended this one, as something, as a possible way to sort of synthesize the whole book, is to try to look for these counterparts, like you mentioned. But yeah, so we'll have 2 more meetups on Goethe. So one is just finishing up the reading, and I'm sure we'll have some time during that meetup as well to just talk about kind of the overarching themes. But then we'll have a completely a separate meetup devoted solely to looking at the entire work. So we'll be able to go back to any passage from part one, compare it to part two, do anything like what you just mentioned, any kind of comparative analysis like that.
Great, thank you, Phil.
Yep. So yeah, that's in the works. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Enjoyed our small but intimate circle of friends, and the discussion is always very stimulating. So I will see you guys in 2 weeks.
See, bye.
All right.
It
Bye-bye.
was a good time.
Thanks.